Candidates. This afternoon we'll be watching former world champion JannLee taking on blitzbullet, and this is two of the strongest crazy house players out there. blitzbullet actually being the slightly higher rated player with almost 2,800. And JannLee just 20 points behind, so they are evenly matched when it comes to ELO. I would say that JannLee is the favorite though to take this match. He has greater experience and a deeper understanding of the game. But blitzbullet will cause him a lot of problems, I think, especially when blitzbullet is wide. He's very solid and he plays really fast, so he will put pressure on JannLee's clock and most likely also on the board. So I see that both players are online, and we will be watching this from the view of JannLee. If we take a quick look here at the overall standings, we see that JannLee is in the lead when it comes to points, but when it comes to game percentage, Katask has a clear lead with his 90%. Katask hasn't played as many matches as JannLee. That's the explanation why JannLee has the lead in the standings when it comes to points. blitzbullet also here at the top. He's third in game percentage and fourth when it comes to points. So let's see if the players are ready to go. They should start pretty soon here. So let's see if we have any viewers yet. Welcome those of you who are watching. If we look at their previous games, you see that JannLee has a clear lead, 137 versus 87. But as you can see, blitzbullet is capable of winning lots and lots of games in a row, even against JannLee. Look there, 7 games in a row. And blitzbullet playing white, I foresee d4, d5, kingside, fianchetto for white. Because that's what blitzbullet usually plays. He's very experienced, but also when you play the same opening over and over, that gives the opponent the opportunity to prepare a bit. So let's see what JannLee has in store for blitzbullet. You notice that white put his bishop, his knight on d2, protecting this knight, because if black takes on f3, white would like to take back with this knight. Also, the knight here prepares c4. So black pushing the h pawn here. Of course, that's an interesting idea, especially when there's a pawn trade coming here on the queen side. I don't know why this guy is challenging me. So this bishop is actually trapped, but white has spent a lot of time here, so JannLee quickly just sacrifices the piece for a pawn. And starts attacking on the white squares here. White gives back a piece. He doesn't want to open the H file. The only problem here for black is this knight. He would have liked to have it on f6 rather than e7. Doesn't have much of a future here on e7. Because where is it going? I mean, it could go to g6, but then where to? So, strong centralization here on e4, threatening the pawn on g3. Of course, white could put a pawn on f2, but I don't think that is blitzbullet's idea, really. He wants to play more actively. No, I don't want to play a 10-minute game. We're watching Crazy House here. I'm sorry. And I never ever play 10-minute games. So blitzbullet thinking a lot here. I wonder why. So he prefers to protect the pawn from this angle, keeping the f file open. Slightly odd decision, but keeping lines and diagonals open. But having all his pawns on dark squares means that the light squares are weak. Maybe going around like this would be an idea for black. I'm not sure this is the best square for the black knight. So JannLee playing one of his patented queen sacrifices, picking up a piece, and now he will pick up a pawn. The question is, do you take on g5 or do you take on d4? I suspect he will take on g5 because you don't want to let the queen out. And also this pawn was more aggressively placed, threatening the f6 square. So now black has a very simple plan of just pushing the h pawn. So white quickly decides to open up the position, but this leaves a hole on f2 where a knight can land. So I'm not sure who benefits from this. The d5 pawn is hanging, but knight f2 could be coming here. So maybe simply knight e3. Yeah. And white realizes he cannot spend the tempo moving the queen, so he tries to set up some threats of his own. This is starting to look good for black. So black abandons the idea of h4. He sees that he has a very nice positional edge here, so he just plays calmly. The knights are closing in here on I wonder what's happening here. There's no mate threat here because the knight is covering h8. I wonder if black could take here. Yeah, because you're actually threatening to check on h3. Maybe queen e3 here. Or has he found a mate? Indeed, he has found a mate. And queen e4 ends this game. That was a strong display here by JannLee, who takes the lead 1-0. JannLee also prefers to push the d pawn here, playing a more conservative setup. Blitzbullet repeating his kingside fianchetto. Yeah, this is crazy house. So in the previous game we saw JannLee pushing the h pawn. But now he decides to simply castle. One good thing about this maneuver for black is that you swing your knight over to the king's side where the action is going to come. If you compare this knight to this white knight, I think it's that comparison is in favor of the black knight. Simply c6 protecting d5, and now we have that little tilt bug, which happens when we have a lot of viewers, I think. Maybe not. Oh well. So JannLee goes for a trade here. He trades a piece for 2 pawns, leaving the black king somewhat exposed. Although after bishop takes g6, the only thing that white has is those light squares. It doesn't have any knights or heavies to take advantage of the light squares. He only has diags in hand. So nice little dual purpose move here, attacking the bishop, threatening g2 maybe. So I would say this is unclear. Black might consider simply taking on g2, yeah. So this shuts out the light squared bishop and also controls the f3 square. Black handles this really aggressively. This opens up for the queen. But now what? Okay, so he just leaves the knight hanging, but if you take and black takes and the queen takes, you have bishop at f3 check. So super aggressive play here, and black could take on f2, either with the knight or the rook. I'm not sure which is better. And white is obviously very exposed here. He has a lot of pieces, 6 pieces waiting in line to get on the board, but really get the chance to place them. And meanwhile, even though the light squares look weak, it doesn't seem like white will have a chance to make any use of them. The queen and the bishop covers a lot of squares. So simply putting pressure here on the g2 square And this bishop is ready to pick up the e5 pawn. So I'm very suspicious here. This cannot be good for black. For white, sorry. Maybe you can take on g2 with the rook, clearing f2 for a knight. It does seem very tempting. Because if you take on g2 with the rook, you're threatening rook at g1 as well. Blitzbullet trying to find some forced win here. This is slightly different. It looks scary to pick up the rook here. Although you could make a run for it. See how far you can get. And at some point you could try to launch a counter-attack here, but it looks like the black king can take care of himself. So black is using the pieces he has on the board and just picks up some extra material. Although now the white king is safe all of a sudden. c4 is covered. So maybe JannLee will get a chance. What about d4, trying to open things up a little bit? So this is a purely defensive move, trying to mend the weak squares around the king. And indeed it looks like black has everything under control here. Simply plug something here on g2 or g5. The d4 pawn push is coming. And you could just take on d4, yeah, because now black has a winning attack, a little magnet, queen e3 coming, the rook is hanging. So blitzbullet will wrap this up. Just closing this exit. And it's 1-1. Both players winning their games as black. And I'm a bit curious why JannLee didn't play exactly the same thing as white as it does as black here. So in the previous game, white game by blitzbullet, we saw c5 trapping this bishop, but even now JannLee goes for the piece sacrifice. So this is immediately very, very sharp. So this knight covers the dark squares. Very hard to figure out what is happening here. The white king is so naked, but he has plenty of light pieces and the rook covering his ass. Maybe JannLee is thinking about queen takes g5 followed by bishop takes h3, but I wouldn't recommend it. So black has actually sacrificed a couple of pieces here for 2 pawns, and the white light pieces look dominating here. I don't think that black can do anything constructive with his pawns. Simply bishop g2, looking to take on c6. Or he could just start an attack immediately. So probably knight g5. So this is actually inviting a queen trade here. Takes, and the queens might be swapped. But a queen trade would surely favor white. So black really needs to think about where he's putting his pieces now. Let's say king f8, white could take on d4, queen takes d4, and knight takes e6 because of the pin on the f file. But where do you put the king? I mean, you cannot go here because of bishop c5, simply forking king and knight. And king g8, you have pawn f7, king f8, and bishop c5 once again, just picking up the knight, probably with the queen even, so you can trade queens later. And black had to take on g5. And white simply has too many threats here. Just watch out so you don't... okay. Rook takes f5, ended that game. And blitzbullet takes the lead 2-1. JannLee switching to e4 instead, and blitzbullet plays rather provocative queenside fan shadow variation where he quickly flings his knight over to the king side. And a move I really like here is h4. h4 would have put pressure here on the knight. I think black's idea would be to, well, h4 and then put the knight on h5 so you can go to f4. So this move covers f4. Black threatening to maybe give a piece for 2 pawns here. Nice space advantage for white. Black is likely to run out of moves, but he has this very dominant bishop on the long diagonal. Even though white has a space advantage here, I'd say he's not so well coordinated, actually. G2 is a weakness, and if black gets a pawn, he could give a piece for a pawn at some point, maybe. He has a fork where he immediately gets back his piece on G2. Where is white putting his king? It will be hard to castle king side. So maybe queen e2 and put the king over here on the queen side. So this is a preemptive move, getting out of the long diagonal so you can actually push the e-pawn. So if you take with a knight, you take here and you have a fork on f3 in the next move. So I suspect that JannLee will sacrifice his queen. If knight f3, JannLee will take on f3. But I'm a bit suspicious here. Not sure if he has enough for the queen. You would like to have the time to play knight d2 and castle long. Hi there, Zaraza. Well, white had better put some pieces on the board here. And this is actually an invitation to a draw. And I wouldn't be surprised if blitzbullet actually is... I think blitzbullet will keep playing in this game. He has better time, he has the better position for sure. I don't think JannLee has enough for his queen. But we see a draw. Let's see what the computer thinks about the final position. I say black is better, and the computer says black is better. Okay. So we have 2.5, 1.5 in favor of blitzbullet. So the same opening we saw in the last few games. And no immediate piece sacrifice on g3 anyway. And having a pawn on e5 is much better than having a pawn on c5. This leaves d4 hanging. But maybe you take on f7 and fork on c3, or what do you do? I'm not sure. Maybe you retreat to e6, keeping an eye on g5. So that's an extra pawn here for black. Although the black king is somewhat unsafe, of course. And black does have some problems on with the g5 square. White is threatening to take on e6, bishop takes, and knight g5 check. So what do you do here? Well, this queen is threatening c5 now. Black needs to be really careful. Marcus Valina. This is from the Crazy House Candidates. Two of the best players fighting it out for probably second and third place. White trying to find a safe spot for his queen, but this is very sharp position. Let's say black plays knight g6. White will just keep pushing forward by taking on g7. The black king is so weak here. Oh, and f5 was hanging as well. Sure looks like white has made some progress here. Maybe you take on b4. Is that a move? Take on b4. Knight takes and then take on e7 and put the bishop on f6. I'm curious. I'm not sure this is the right way to handle this for white. But you'd have an impressive initiative here. Let's say king h7, you take on f5, black takes back, queen h6 check. Pawn takes, queen h6, king g8, bishop at e6, something on f7, and queen g6. Threatening h5. So you can trade queens here with check if you like. If black takes, white takes, king takes, you have queen f6. And now you want, I'd say you want to pawn for f6, but this is quite enough for white. Yeah. Let me just check one position there. I'm curious about... Black is actually quite okay here. Yeah, queen takes b4. Queen takes b4. And there was another point where he could have taken here. Yeah, queen takes b4, just as I mentioned. Queen takes b4 is really strong here also. This is the candidate tournament of the Crazy House World Championship. And we're watching JannLee versus blitzbullet. JannLee, former world champion, is trailing in this match because blitzbullet is in the lead 3.5, 1.5. And in the previous game here, blitzbullet showed really why he is such a dangerous player, especially with white. Let's see what happened in the opening here. We see a d4, d5 opening, and blitzbullet choosing his kingside fianchetto. And I don't know why JannLee doesn't go for the h4 pawn push with his extra tempo, but let's see what's happening here. Usually a bishop is slightly stronger than a knight, just as in chess. And I don't see anything wrong with the black position here. His bishops have great scope. I don't think taking on f6 works. The bishop on h6 is doomed. White picking up some material here. Although the remaining black forces are doing just fine. And the d-pawn pushing forward makes a lot of sense. Question is, do you take with the knight? It sits really nicely on f5, but d4 is another nice square for the knight. Oh, strong pressure here against the white bishops. Looks like black will get material back here. White just has to figure out what is the best way of giving the material back. And JannLee thinking a lot how to give the material back. Not easy at all. So he decided to protect his d4 pawn, which is cutting off this bishop. I wonder if white should have taken on f5 instead, because now it looks really open here on the long diagonal. And g4 is hanging. Black is looking so active here. Poor coordination for white, and the queen is getting kicked here. And watch out for something landing here, maybe in the future. You could take on g4, threatening queen h2 mate. Black would like to have a knight in hand. So probably pawn h5. Okay, so he trades queens, and how can black find a knight? Well, here's a knight. Probably a bishop g6, covering h5, and then go knight hunting. Gain a knight for f2. So trying to lure the white queen away from h2, where it would be mate. So if black takes here, you can maybe check with the bishop. Do you give your queen for... I'm not sure what's happening here. White actually finding some strong counterplay here, it seems. So this is looking slightly dangerous. Rook here, followed by knight f7. White picking up a die here on g5. And it's actually mate. That was a cute finish by JannLee, who is still behind, but by only 1 point now. Let's look at the finish. Something happened there. Blitzbullet was doing just fine. But JannLee went on the attack here, and black should have been very cautious here, playing king h7 maybe, and definitely not take on f7, because look at this strong move. Queen takes g4, and after black took on g4, it's all over. And this is a beauty. Pushing the black king to the right square. I'm sure blitzbullet missed this move, because otherwise black could have defended, but this is really cute. A very economic attack. White had just the pieces he needed. Let's go back to the game they're playing now. And what happened here? This time JannLee plays a continuation that Zixon chose against blitzbullet, trying to trade a pawn on the queen side early on and then just start attacking on the king side. Wow. So black has won some material, a piece and a pawn. If black takes twice here, there's knight g5 and e6 is hanging. So black just leaves this bishop alone. And this looks like a perfect position for JannLee. I would say he'll have to do some defending, but he's such a great defender, and he has that extra material that he will make use of later in the game. White simply doesn't have enough compensation. These pieces are buried on the queen side, not contributing very much. Now is not the time to take on g5 because of queen takes e6 mate. And I'm not sure why black didn't just take on e3. That looked much, much simpler. And all of a sudden it looks like White has compensation. Only takes a tiny little mistake. So what will happen now? Well, black will need to move his queen, I guess. And then white can simply take on h4. Okay, so black tries to close the e file. Notice that this bishop is defending g3. So very unbalanced position here. Two pieces against the queen. White has some extra pawn here, but he has three pawns waiting in line, so it will take quite a while to put them on the board. And if pawn f2, you can take on e3. And if pawn takes, the bishop is hanging. So what do you do here? I suppose you could take on d4, threatening e6, but black recaptures, threatening the queen and protecting e6. And white is going all in here. He does threaten to check on g5, but I'm very skeptical here. Surely this isn't enough for white. So bishop check here, or on c5. And if white blocks, you can take on e2, and then you can take on g3 with check. And if you don't block, well, there was queen g1 mate. So it looks like JannLee is winning this game. And it's he's equalized 3.5, 3.5. That went quickly downhill for blitzbullet. So JannLee once again plays a quick c4 just to trade a pawn here. So maybe we'll see finally an h4 pawn push here. Yeah, with probably bishop takes h6. And that is where you want to place the pawn. I'm thinking maybe white should have taken on d5 first and then put his pawn on h6, but I'm not sure. So knight b4, or I'm a bit skeptical about this move because with the bishop still on f1, white has g2 covered. So we can quickly just open the h file. Watch out now here for bishop g6, threatening knight at c2 check. Wow, what is this? So maybe an under promotion with check here coming. Something went really wrong for black here, I think. So, I mean, you need to allow the check here, but does white have a follow-up? Can you play pawn g2 as black? But I mean, let's say pawn at g2. You take here with check, and then you have stuff like rook at h8 check, rook h8, and then knight at f7. With the pawn here on g2, the g file is closed, so this rook isn't participating in the attack. So a little safety move here, preparing castling. But what about rook h8? Is it winning? King takes, knight f7, bishop takes, knight takes, let's say king g7, well, now it definitely looks very tempting, because you can pick up the rook with check. Yeah, rook h8 out now. And as soon as the black king goes to the g file, you can pick up g1 with check. So this should be winning for white. Oh, this is winning for white. You have a bishop there also. So maybe bishop to h5. Well, blitzbullet just resigned. And I'm curious. JannLee did have an opportunity earlier to... I don't understand this. Why didn't it just take on h6? Okay, so this was just bad. Queen h2 looks strong here. And how about rook h8 here? King takes, knight check. Yeah, it's actually a forced mate. King g7, pawn h6, take. You have enough pieces to finish him off. So he did miss a forced mate there, but he got the chance a couple of moves later. And JannLee is in the lead, 4.5, 3.5. We see the same early c5 line again. And maybe this is the green kryptonite for blitzbullet's opening. With the knight on h4, what is preventing the pawn push? So how is this? Here's an important difference though. White has put his knight on c3 instead. When did he do this? Oh, and JannLee played bishop f5. So he didn't put it on g4. He put it on f5 instead, and then white doesn't have to protect f3. So after black captures here, this knight will be a bit loose. Oh, I'm sorry, gingerbread man. But lucky for you, you can watch it afterwards. You're welcome. So g6, pawn at g6, strong move. White doesn't mind giving up his rook here on f2 in case black takes. He doesn't mind giving up his bishop either, it seems. But these knights are covering the important squares, and this knight is even covering g5. So there are no knight checks for white, even if he had a knight. So this is an interesting move, because if black moves his knight here, white will get the chance to trade it. But what if you simply play knight d5? I'm thinking knight d5 and then maybe just take on h4 and put something here and pick up this bishop with check. It's almost mate. What does white do after knight d5? Does he play bishop e5 or... So when you have the bishop here on g2, white needs to be a little bit careful, because there's heavy here on g1 and then take on f2 smothered mate. Maybe simply push the f pawn just to get the f4 square for a knight. Now it's too late. So material is about even. I would say black is actually quite safe with his king here. And black is only 2 steps away here from the white king. So pawn here, pawn here. Also the f2 pawn is hanging. So this is inviting perpetual bishop f5 here, but JannLee isn't interested in any perpetuals. I like the knight g2 maneuver here. Black wanted to get rid of the knight here on h4. Black has a strong grip here on the position. He can take on f2. Very nice move here by JannLee, protecting the bishop. So simply take on f2. You have knight f2 check. Or even pawn f2 and then rook g1. This is over. So everything comes with check here, pawn h4. And simply queen g3 followed by h3 should decide matters. Oh, this seems very unnecessary. Wow, knight at e5. What's happening here? Well, blitzbullet wasn't sure what was happening either, so he got a bit confused and overstepped the time limit. That was the fourth consecutive win by JannLee, who takes the lead 5.5, 3.5, and he's winning this match. But I just want to take a look here at the end of the last game. Sorry, JannLee, blitzbullet, this game. Black is super winning here. And here, as I suggested, simply queen g3 followed by h3 is just winning. And instead he chose this continuation, and all of a sudden White is back in the game. So it's down to -2 now. What should White play here then? Okay. Even rook h6 check is interesting. Okay, maybe not. Well, anything is better than overstepping the time limit anyway. Although I should mention that Black has a lot of threats here. For instance, rook takes c2, and so Black is probably winning in the end as well. And let's watch the last game of the match. blitzbullet playing something different. And I do like the h4 idea here. Where do you put that knight? So Black sacrifices material, 2 pieces for a couple of pawns, and the f5 is open. So when or if the knight retreats, you have maybe pawn at g4, winning some material back. Let's say, I don't know, knight d3, pawn g4, take here, you can take here with a double check, discovered check. And all of a sudden maybe it's a bit dangerous for White. So I wonder if JannLee has been a bit greedy here. He needs to find a way to give back the material safely. So as I predicted here, pawn g4. And if the bishop moves now, you have knight takes, oh, you can take the knight, you can take the bishop, of course. Sorry, with double check. So White decides to give up this bishop. Black tucking his king away in the corner just to avoid any problems here on this diagonal. And look at JannLee's time. He's down to his last 10 seconds. So what you do here? Maybe simply, yeah, move away, get rid of this bishop. You need to get this bishop out, get rook into action. Maybe pawn e5. And even in this position, maybe pawn e5, simply take here. Oh, now you can take on e3. The queen comes into action. Strong move here by blitzbullet, threatening to pick up c4. And it's over. Yeah, nice touch there by blitzbullet. He gave 2 pieces. Let's analyze that final game. Congratulations to JannLee. He wins this match 5.5, 4.5. And as you can see, the computer really likes white here. Also, he likes pawn at f5. What does he think about h4? Well, he likes h4 as well. I just think that if you have a good move that you can do with the pieces you have on the board, you should generally prefer that. Yeah, I think maybe h4 is stronger. Who knows? This should be good for white. Simply taking on g6, yeah, allowing the discovered double check. Looks gutsy to take on g6, but if you can get away with it, it's really strong for sure. Black keeps the f file open, and look, after d6, black is actually doing quite okay here. And already here, after knight d3 and pawn g4, black has probably equalized or even more. So even though white is a piece up for a pawn here, black has such strong initiative. King h8 looked really strong. And e5 just opening the position. White doesn't have time to pick up that rook. Black playing all the natural moves here. Great finish. Yeah, knight h5. Nice one. So, thank you all for watching, and as you probably noticed, there will be no more matches today because earlier it was supposed to be JannLee versus Katask tonight, but they have rescheduled, so you will have to wait one more week for the heavyweight match between JannLee and Katask. Both players undefeated in this tournament. JannLee has drawn his match against Bagzilla, and he has won the rest of his matches, whereas Katask has won, you see, 10-0, 10-0, 10-0, 10-0, and a 9-1 and 2-7-3 wins. That's super impressive. Yeah, tomorrow we will see Opperwesen versus Zixon. and that will be a treat for sure. So I will most likely be streaming that match. Zixen being my fellow countryman, I can't skip